You're now live, so you can start.
Right. Okay. Evening, everyone, and welcome to this online meeting on Tuesday, 20th of October, 2020 of the Governance and Audit Committee. I'm Councillor Chris Pearson, Councillor for Beerchurch Ward, and I chair this committee. The meeting's being broadcast live via Zoom over the internet and on the Council's YouTube channel, and will be available to watch afterwards. A few matters of housekeeping. With the exception of the Democratic Services officers advising us, would participants please mute their microphones unless they're invited to speak. I'll ask for each item of business to be presented and then ask members of the panel if they wish to ask a question or comment. At the end of each item of business, I'll either ask for a show of hands or we'll take a vote depending on the item. If we carry on till 8 o'clock, we will have a break, though I don't anticipate this evening we're likely to. I'm not aware of any substitutions this evening as we're all here. I've not been made aware of any urgent items, so I'm just going to ask people to introduce themselves before we move any further on. So, Councillor Dundas, can I ask you to...
Good evening, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, Councillor Paul Dundas, representing Stanway Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Wood.
Councillor Barbara Wood, representing Tiptree Ward.
Councillor Willits.
Dennis Willits, representing Lexton and Bracewick Ward.
Councillor Gocher.
Councillor Mark Gocher, representing Castle Ward.
Councillor Barlow.
Councillor Nick Barlow, also representing Castle Ward.
And Councillor McCarthy.
Good evening, Councillor McCarthy representing Shrub End Ward and also Deputy Chair of the committee.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest this evening? I'm not seeing any hands, so I'll presume that there aren't. We have no have your says that I'm aware of. So we'll move on to minutes of the previous meeting. Those who were present, are there any issues with the previous minutes? No?
Chairman, there are no minutes presented for approval at this meeting.
True. You're right. Thank you for that. So we'll move on then to item 7 on the agenda, which is the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman's report, and this is to be introduced by Andrew Weavers.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good evening. I'd like to start off this evening's meeting with a bit of good news for the Council. So this report is, as you said, the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman's annual letter for 2019-20. So the key headlines on the report are: there are no public interest reports issued. There was one complaint upheld by the Ombudsman, with one key service improvement recommendation which was agreed and completed to the Ombudsman's satisfaction, and details of that complaint are contained at paragraph 5.5 of the report. The table at paragraph 5.3 contains the Ombudsman's categorisation of complaints. Paragraph 5.6 highlights the number of direct customer contacts received by the Council during 1920, i.e. 210,377, which we can contrast against the number of complaints received by the Ombudsman during the same period, which is 20. The table in para 5.7 provides details of the Council's performance compared to the other district councils in Essex. And the heading of satisfactory remedies in that table provided by the Council shows 0%. And this is because the one upheld complaint did not come within the remit of that indicator. So finally, Chair, paragraphs 5.8 and 5.9 highlight the general high levels of customer satisfaction for accessing the council services. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Weavers. Questions or comments on the report? I'm not seeing any indications. All right. I think it's useful and interesting to see how well we've performed as a council in terms of complaints, and how well we do against similar sized authorities and other authorities as well in the county of Essex. So well done to everyone and to the staff at Colchester Borough Council for the way in which we manage our complaints. Councillor Willits, I see your hand raised now.
Yes, Chairman, I just support your view as just stated. I mean, it's incredibly low number of incidents, not just in Colchester, but across the whole of Essex. When one looks at the number of complaints and you consider the potential for things to go wrong and so on. I think I'm delighted not only for Colchester but for the whole of Essex that there is such significant satisfaction with local government across the whole of the county. And it's just a shame we didn't understand better the rules about bonfires, a matter which I've always found difficult to comprehend, always find difficult to advise constituents when they say, can I have a bonfire? Is it permitted and at what time? And it always, I always get confused, and clearly, if that's the only transgression we make in the course of a year, I think we've done jolly well.
Thank you, Councillor Willits. Yeah, so I think if we could ask that our congratulations to everyone involved are passed on. Thank you. I'm not seeing any other indications, so we're asked to note the report and I think that's it really. So thanks very much, everyone. We'll move on then to item 8, the health and safety report, and Carl Free is to introduce this for us. Please, Mr. Free.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is the health and safety report. To note the health and safety report for 1920 and approval of the health and safety policy for 2021. So starting with the health and safety policy, there hasn't really been many changes to it. It's just been updated really for the organisation structure to make it the most accurate. Obviously with some restructures and things moving around, different teams moving around. So not many changes there, but for approval. And just going through the summary of the policy outcomes, the health and safety report. Obviously quite a few changes in ways of working this year, and busy with various other things COVID related, as opposed to what was perhaps planned at the start of the year. So previously I said about audits and inspections, what I'd carried out across the council. These were being worked on. There are larger topics, sort of ill health, security across the buildings. And those things were still actioned, but obviously COVID took more priority over those, but we'll be reviewing those in the new year to make sure the learning points are actioned and completed from those. Just looking at some of the focus points from COVID, health and safety advice, obviously had to produce some more documentation, templates and guidance to get that out to staff and teams. Provided updates to the COVID strategic and operational teams, groups, in the council. We're dealing with the immediate actions, outcomes from that. Delivering health and safety training to some redeployed staff. So obviously some staff were busier than others, and we needed to focus on those critical areas. So they needed the health and safety training as per if they were usual employees. And personal protective equipment obviously is difficult to get hold of. And all new equipment and hand sanitizer, what we needed in the teams, what wasn't needed before. So managed that sort of centrally for the council, managed to get stocks in. And as far as I'm aware, everyone had the correct PPE, what they needed at all times. We didn't run out of that. And then the massive changes of making all the workplaces and different customer sites such as Leisure World COVID secure, so staff and customers could go there and return to the office and those places safely. So looking at paragraph 5.3, the lone working devices. So for lone workers across the council, if they're in trouble, they can press the button on these devices. The company has now actually produced an app on smartphones, and with phones being much more prevalent across the teams, we had managed to trial that, and there's been some positive feedback on that. So actually might be able to transfer over from the devices to the apps, which works exactly the same. You press the button on your phone and it calls, goes to the monitoring center, and they can activate any response if necessary. As it's on an app, it's not an actual physical device, so there's some savings there while maintaining the lone worker safety level. There was an internal audit of health and safety this year, only just completed just before this report, and we got a reasonable assurance of that. Some of the main recommendations, as it's detailed, inspections. Quarterly inspections happen across council sites, and some of these were missing, which is a bit more of a record keeping failure really there. So they're being done, but we just needed to update those details. And some of the teams of changeover of staff, just making sure they knew what they needed to do. And another one was incidents, making sure incidents, health and safety incidents were being reported timely and investigated. We've got a new incident form in its final stages, which is due to come out, and that'll assist with monitoring this and making sure that the incidents or the investigations are completed in a timely fashion. And say training, health safety training continued. So obviously I did some of that for the new employees moving over, redeployment. But also just at the start of the year, converted the health and safety induction course, which was in person, to an e-learning package. So that could continue for any new starters during COVID pandemic. And first aiders, while that was given a bit of a suspension that didn't need to keep first aid certificates up to date, that was quickly reverted, and first aiders were required to continue their first aid training. So we managed to put that on in a COVID secure way, and our first aiders continue to be trained and kept up to date on that. And practical manual handling training at neighbourhood services. So they needed a refresher of training, and we managed to get that delivered, and it's delivered outside, and they've actually really good feedback from that, saying how useful it was, because I gave some practical tips and how it actually affects the body, to make sure so the staff actually knew the reasons why they're following the training, and hopefully reduce the back problems and any other musculoskeletal disorders there. And this year, incidents reported, they've continued to stay low, and we had 2 at the start of the year. Staff fractured their ankle from a slip and trip, and a member of the public taken to hospital following an asthma attack. As you can see, the numbers have gone down over the years and now staying at that low level. And the final point is obviously well-being is obviously promoted at this time. Difficult changes of how different ways we're working, but I continue to work with the Live Well, Work Well, the wellbeing group we have at the council, and it's wellbeing is a priority in the new people strategy. There are some surveys that went out, which I have some results from, which I believe you've requested, so I can give those to you a bit later if you just want to confirm what your questions were on those. But that was all. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Free. So I'll just remind members, if you want to comment or ask any questions, just raise your hand using the facility. I've got Councillor Willits and Councillor Dundas. So Councillor Willits first, please.
Mr. Chairman, the health and safety policy sort of builds from year to year. We have an extremely good base, which clearly protects our people and our customers. But as I said, we should never be complacent. There is always room for checking and improving the quality of the way health and safety is done. And it's always good to see a new pair of hands from time to time come in and take over this area and ensure that what was good 10 years ago, if it's still good now, fine, but new practices may be required. We're actually looking, Chairman, at the report for 2019-20, and of course there was only effectively 3 weeks of COVID at the end of the year. But it's good to have a glimpse forward into what is being done to ensure that the good practices of the past continue, even although some of the risks change quite dramatically with the new disease. I think my comments are very much similar to those that I made on the previous item. We have a very low number of incidents, and perhaps health and safety is one of those where we concentrate more on the risks than what is actually happening on the ground. But I always like to look at it from the other point of view, and really there have been no serious issues in the past year. One trip and sprain of the ankle is perhaps one too many, but it's not all that serious. And the fact that someone had an asthma attack on our premises, a member of public, shouldn't really cause us to have abject alarm about what's going on. And yes, there will always be odd occasions of record keeping where it could be improved. But I think looking at this report as a whole, Chairman, I hope I'm not getting complacent, but it does show that again we have a situation well under control, in my view, and congratulations all round to those officers, senior officers, who have been sort of pushing the issue of health and safety and well-being down through their chains. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Willits. Yeah, the elephant in the room, of course, at the moment is COVID-19, but as Councillor Willits has quite rightly reminded us, this is a report about health and safety in 1920. So only a few weeks of that annual period we were involved in lockdown, and COVID-19 was the serious event that we now know it to be. I'll move on to Councillor Dundas then, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, very, very briefly. Thank you for the report. I think I'll echo Councillor Willits' comments. It's a very good report, and I think there's deserves some praise for that. It's really just about a question looking ahead, really. Particularly 4.8. We're talking about things like workplace temperatures and things like that. I appreciate this is from last year, but looking ahead, obviously the workplace now for a lot of our staff is at home, so we haven't got the same ability to monitor what they're doing. I just, how are we getting that message across? I'm just thinking with the winter upon us, I wouldn't want to think of staff sitting freezing at home, sort of particularly worried about cost of putting heating on all day, which a cost they might not be used to. I'm just wondering what sort of message we're giving to our staff about that.
Thank you, Councillor Dundas. Mr. Free, I wonder if you could respond to that query, please.
Yeah, sure. So I think while it's not the workplace, so we don't have sort of direct control there, what we've alluded to at the end, had a survey gone out asking about staff sort of well-being working at home. So I have some results from the May 2020, and one of them is, I know how to keep safe and healthy at home during the COVID pandemic. and staff at home, it's 97% in the strongly or agree categories. So only 3% in neutral, disagree or strongly disagree. And we have obviously opportunity for staff to give specific comments there on any of those sort of concerns. So I think across the board it's covered under there, perhaps not specifically about the heating, but I would have hoped that that would be covered generally and staff could raise some concerns there. And while the results are from May, obviously we're a little further on from there. They've just finished another one of those to get the latest picture, and it's only finished this week, I believe, but they had a quick look and it says that those adapting well to changes in working conditions, such as working at home, this is actually improved. So more people were saying slightly agree and strongly agree than it was in May. In the community, it's slightly gone down, it's slightly worsened. Looking at, I have a good work-life balance, it's slightly worsened than before, and routine to maintaining well-being has actually worsened for staff working at home. So when we get opportunity and once those results have been analysed further, we'll obviously review those and action where necessary and see if there's any of those specific concerns about heating or whatever the case may be, so we can sort of advise and look to provide various guidance and help staff really.
Thank you. Yeah, I can see that Dan Gascoigne wants to come in, but I just on that point, and I know we're looking mostly at 1920, but as I say, I think at the moment everybody is focused on how COVID-19 is not only affecting the wider public, but also affecting the workplace for our staff. Have we provided home working guidance, and is everyone who's doing home working undertaking their own health and safety assessment of their working environment and the equipment that they have?
So yes, there's a display screen equipment assessment, which includes the working environment. So questions such as fire alarms, things like that, slip trip hazards, and so yeah, that will be covered in there. There's some general guidance gone out about home working safety as well.
And well-being as well, because I know there are some individuals who take to home working like ducks to water, but there are also other individuals who find it very difficult to be working in those isolated states for any lengthy period of time.
Yeah, so throughout the time really there's been lots of focus on well-being. So obviously I support that sort of group, and it's the people performance and well-being sort of teams, and I've just got some notes. So that the well-being group meets very regularly virtually to discuss any ideas and concerns, what's coming up. They've put out a Building Better Mental Health webinar, lunch and learn well-being sessions. There's some top tips for looking after your well-being on Colin the intranet, and a coping calendar. They're continuing to train well-being champions and mental health first aiders across the council. And of course we have the employee assistance programme and the people strategy. There's a strand in there focusing on our people's physical and mental health well-being so they can thrive at work. Some areas called valued and inclusive in there. To make sure those aims are met, and I think they're involving staff and managers in the in an engagement group to get ideas from those, and making sure any of sort of their concerns and well-being issues are being looked at, and make sure we're delivering the strategy and helping those staff.
Thank you. Dan Gascoigne, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I just wanted to sort of back up what Carl was saying. Really, I think it is something that, as a senior management team, we're sort of acutely aware that we need to work harder to stay in touch with our staff in these times. And clearly, we've had to do a lot of work everyone's had to adapt very rapidly. So it's important we keep the surveys going out to understand what's happening and check how people are feeling. And we're doing quite a lot, I think, as Carl's indicated, to respond to that and make sure we do encourage managers to talk to their staff and find new ways to sort of network and engage with people, because it is harder to maintain contact. Sometimes I think for people there isn't that informal contact and communication in the office that a lot of people do value, as you say. But mainly I wanted to just actually acknowledge the work that Carl's done really during the pandemic period up to now. I mean, although this is a 1920 report, I think everyone was very busy towards the end of March, not least Carl, and had to do a lot of work quite creatively to make sure we had an adequate supply of PPE, for example, and also then later, as workplaces were, as the guidance was clarified on how to make workplaces COVID secure, leading the work with our colleagues to ensure that we're able to do that and keep places secure as the guidance continues to adapt and change. So I just wanted to get that on the record, Chair.
Thank you, Dan. Any more questions or comments? No? All right. I'll wrap us up then. With reference to Ridor, I know those are the most serious incidents that obviously we have to report, and as Councillor Willits noted, it's pleasing to see that we've only had a couple of those in 1920. I think in future, though, I'd be interested to see what the number of incident reports across the piece were, Carl, and how those were managed and how they were dealt with, so that we get some flavour for what's happening. I know this will be an odd year, so it's unlikely to be a normal year in terms of incident reporting. The numbers may be down because people are home working, but they may actually increase because people are home working. So it'd be interesting to get some flavour of that when we look again next year at health and safety. Thank you very much for your contribution this evening. We're asked members to note the 1920 report, and I'm sure you'll all have read cover to cover the 2021 health and safety document, and we're asked to approve that. So could I just have a show of nods and hands? Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone. So we've approved that. We'll move on then. Thank you, Mr. Free. We'll move on to item 9, review of remote digital council meetings. Mr. Weavers, you're on again, I believe.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to give you quite a detailed introduction to this report, because I think there's quite a lot in here which you need to consider. So I'll kick off by saying that this report was written prior to most of Essex being placed in Tier 2, high-level COVID restrictions. However, this has just really emphasised the recommendations in the report regarding remote meetings going forward. The overriding principle, I think, has to be the safety of councillors and officers, and we should not compromise this or the concerns of councillors and officers around their health potentially being put at risk by them being required to attend face-to-face or hybrid meetings for the time being. I mean, the report provides a detailed review of remote meetings and follows on from the interim report, which the committee considered at its meeting on the 28th of July 2020, which is attached to the report at Appendix 1. As the committee will be aware, we are permitted to carry out remote meetings like this by virtue of the regulations which are mentioned in paragraph 5.2 of the report. These are due to expire on the 6th of May 2021 unless they're renewed by the government. We feel that the ability to hold remote meetings regardless of the COVID situation is the way forward, and we should lobby government to extend the regulations to enable local authorities to have the flexibility how they hold their meetings. The report also discusses the benefits and disadvantages of remote meetings, considers the use of hybrid meetings and face-to-face meetings. However, as I mentioned just a minute ago, with the second wave of the pandemic and tighter COVID restrictions being in place, I think we are looking at remote meetings until the end of the current municipal year. Section 6 of the report highlights our experience of remote meetings so far. As we are aware, we've been using Zoom for our meetings, which we are live streaming on the Council's YouTube channel, and it's proposed that we continue to do this. Now, as part of the review, we undertook a survey of councillors, officers and the public of their experience of remote meetings. 32 councillors, which is 64%, responded, and 13 officers. Regrettably, we did not get any public responses despite extending the deadline. However, as mentioned later, we are seeing increased public engagement with our meetings. The councillor survey results are at Appendix 3, which is on page 77, and the officer survey results are at Appendix 4 on page 89. The emerging themes that come out of the survey are addressed in the report. Paragraph 6.3 highlights that overall the survey results demonstrated a positive response to remote meetings. There was also positive feedback for the democratic services and IT teams. And I would also like to add my thanks for my democratic services colleagues as their manager for all their work they have done and continue to do, which ensure that remote meetings operate smoothly, which is highlighted in the report. From the survey, you will see that the majority, 41% of councillors, were in favour of remote meetings, 25% were in favour of face-to-face, 22% in favour of hybrid. So in total, I would say 63% were in favour of remote/hybrid meetings. The survey results indicated that 90% of councillors felt they had the correct kit to enable them to participate in remote meetings. A mention had been made of a second screen being provided to those councillors who needed one. We can facilitate those for those councillors, and indeed if chairs would like it, via the IT team, depending on which kit is being used by individual councillors. And if councillors would like that, if they'd like to let us know, we can sort that out for them. The survey highlighted that 88% of councillors felt they had received sufficient training to enable them to participate in remote meetings, and additional training will be made available for any councillor who feels it would assist them to be able to fully participate in remote meetings. Paragraph 6.10 mentions have your say arrangements. These seem to be working well. They have also proved successful when representatives are making representations on behalf of others, for example, at the planning committee meetings. These arrangements provide for a more structured approach, and it is suggested that the option for remote contributions should be retained for all meetings going forward. Now, as I mentioned earlier, public engagement with our meetings is always of interest to the committee. Appendix 2 at pages 73 to 76 provides details of the viewing figures for our remote meetings between June and December 2020. And you can see which meetings were the most popular. I didn't think governance and audit is near the top of the list though, I'm afraid, Chair. We can see that when we compare these figures against the audio-only figures for the same period last year, there is a 64% increase in public viewing of meetings, indicating a greater public engagement with our meetings, which is very encouraging. Turning to paragraph 6.11 and behaviours during remote meetings, the survey highlighted that 72% of councillors felt that the remote meetings protocol was helpful. The protocol is at Appendix 5 on page 101. The survey highlighted some areas of concern, such as participants disappearing from the screen, etc., during a meeting. These issues are partly covered by the protocol, but the committee may wish to consider how it could be refined further, bearing in mind some of the comments made in the survey. Remote meetings require us to switch to digital agendas for all meetings. This appears to have worked well, and as I mentioned at paragraph 6.3, this has led to a budget saving in printing. We will continue to use digital agendas going forward unless there is a demonstrable need for a paper agenda for individual councillors. The report at paragraph 6.15 recommends that all briefings for chair and group spokespersons should be remote going forward. At paragraph 16, the report highlights that meeting chairs should retain flexibility for the reasons mentioned in the report to be in a room with officers if necessary due to the number of participants and or procedurally complicated nature of business being transacted. Paragraph 617 highlights the options available for chairs regarding voting. As we know, remote meetings bring their own challenges, and transparency around decision making is particularly important when all participants are not visible on the screen at the same time. It is suggested that the rules could be amended to clarify when it would be appropriate to have a roll call, i.e. a contentious or a quasi-judicial matter, or when to have a more informal process. Paragraph 624 and Appendix 6 on page 107 considers the length of remote meetings, as this has been highlighted in the survey. As can be seen in the analysis, it indicates that overall there has only been a marginal increase, with a couple of notable exceptions, i.e. cabinet and scrutiny. The councillor survey also highlighted the impact of long meetings being held online. The survey highlighted that 63% felt the break times were adequate. However, 69% felt that the 4-hour maximum duration for remote meetings was too long. The committee is requested to consider whether any changes are required to the rules in the light of the survey responses. Going forward, we will need to consider whether we should consider investing in more sophisticated webcasting equipment. This is considered at paragraph 6.22 of the report, and it is suggested that officers undertake further work on this and bring a report back to you in due course. I would, however, highlight that there is currently no budget for this additional equipment. So in conclusion, Chairman, it is recommended that we continue with remote meetings for all the reasons and benefits, such as the environmental ones mentioned, but keep them under review. Hybrid meetings are an option in the future, provided the health and safety issues highlighted at section 9 of the report are observed and satisfied, and also provided that the meeting participants feel safe. However, these are not being recommended at this current time. Chair, I would invite the committee to consider the report and the recommendations set out at section 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weavers. I was focused on Councillor Dundas to make sure that he didn't walk off at any point during that. Councillors, members, I just remind you then, in paragraph 2.3 of the report, we have a number of detailed recommendations for us to consider this evening and make to full council if we're in agreement. So the first of those is that all meetings continue to be remote by default and hosted via Zoom and live streamed on YouTube. This to be kept under review in light of evolving government guidance and legal requirements. The second recommendation is that all briefings for committee and panel chairs and group spokespeople be held remotely. The third is consider the possibility of hybrid and face-to-face meetings, but only when both government guidance and legislation permits, and following a C19 health and safety risk assessment for each meeting. Next one is that chairs of meetings retain flexibility to determine how formal votes are conducted, non-controversial items, and I think I've tended to follow this process over the last couple of meetings in governance and audit. So non-controversial items be agreed by the chair, just asking participants to indicate whether anyone's against a proposal or all are in favour. Where the subject matter is controversial, however, or relates to a quasi-judicial matter, a roll call of councillors is taken to ensure that everybody has voted and there's transparency. Then the next one is that chairs of meetings retain the option of being physically present with an officer or officers when required, suitably social distance, of course, and whether due to procedural complexity of the meeting or the nature of the business being transacted, that makes sense. And the final one is that government be lobbied to extend the regulations to enable remote and/or hybrid meetings to continue beyond May 2021. So those are the recommendations. I know there are likely to be a number of comments and questions. I would just like to echo Mr. Weaver's thanks to Democratic Services for getting us up and running so quickly and efficiently and effectively, I would suggest. We've had one or two teething problems early on, but I think most of those have now been resolved. So we seem to have taken to this mostly like ducks to water. It's become the new normal, just to use one or two more catchphrases. And we've also got the protocol to look at. So I think it just behooves those of us who are members of governance and audit and have looked at this in detail, just to remind our colleagues about the etiquette of virtual meetings, because I think it is important that we present the right face to the residents of Colchester and to our colleagues, of course. So with that said, I will open up to questions and comments, and in no particular order. I've got Councillor Gocher first.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to thank the officers for all the work they've done, Democratic Services for all the work they've done on remote meetings. I mean, it's obviously taken a lot of work, and a huge thanks to them. In terms of the 6 proposals that have just been outlined, I would vote yes to all of them. I certainly think that we shouldn't be going back to physical meetings while the COVID situation is what it is. You know, that would not be a good idea. So absolutely, I would certainly agree with you know, the main proposals there. And we do need the option of continuing with certainly hybrid meetings once the COVID situation has changed. We don't know when that's going to happen, of course, but absolutely. So I vote yes for all the proposals, and I very much agree with most of what was said. I just have 2 concerns, but they all relate to post-COVID. They do not relate to the situation as it is now. One concern is the difficulty that some of our older residents have in accessing the meetings via IT technology that they might not be familiar with. That is a concern. And also, my other concern for post-COVID would be, you know, that having everything on digital meetings just take away some of the social aspects and some of the ceremonial aspects of what we do. I'm thinking, for example, the mayor making ceremony, which would lose some of its fizz, shall we say? You know, so that is a long-term concern. But of course, it is older residents that are most vulnerable to COVID. So absolutely, we have to protect them. In terms of the reports I was reading, I'm particularly pleased with the YouTube engagement. Some of these meetings have had hundreds of viewers, and nothing like that happened with the real kind of physical meetings. The biggest one I can remember is the one where they were discussing pedestrianising the high street in the Public Policy Initiatives panel. But usually there's 10 people there, 12 people there. Hundreds of people are now engaging. So I think that is absolute excellent achievement.
Thank you, Councillor Gocher. Yeah, I would echo your comments about the pizzazz factor being lost with virtual meetings for mayor making, for instance. And I think we need to be mindful of that. I don't think anyone's suggesting that we don't go back to face-to-face meetings when it's safe to do so. Although there are probably some lessons that we can learn from virtual meetings, certainly in terms of chairs and spokespersons briefings, I don't see any reason why those couldn't carry on ad infinitum being virtual. But I take your point as well about the opportunity to socialise and to have that interaction between members of all parties, which I think is a very positive contribution to how we manage the council. Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would certainly also back up everybody's comments about democratic services. I think they've done a fantastic job. And I also agree with Councillor Gocher's comments about there has to be a balance, I think. I wouldn't want a situation where perhaps individual councillors could end up, they don't effectively see anybody or visit the town hall for 3 years. It could happen. I'd probably myself want to perhaps keep full council, perhaps as a physical meeting. It's only 5 times a year. I think it's important for the, we do actually put on a public show sometimes and actually show that as councillors we do sort of physically turn up and debate. So that is perhaps my feeling. Obviously, we're a little bit dependent on what the government decides. As Mr. Weaver's pointed out, these current rules expire on the 7th of May. Who knows where we'll be with coronavirus at that time. But they'll either be extended or there'll be a discussion about putting something more permanent in place. On that, I would endorse the recommendations. I think they're well written. I do support them. I think the only comments I'd have on the survey, I think it makes a big difference. I think equipment is a big factor, actually. I mean, personally, I've tried doing these meetings on everything ranging from 3 monitors with a desk in an enclosed room to an old laptop balanced on top of a camping fridge in a tent in Norfolk, powered off an old car battery. And one is a lot easier than the other. I find online meetings quite difficult to do on a laptop or a phone or a iPod, or other manufacturers are available equivalent, but on a big screen, on a desktop computer, at a desk, in a room where you can close the door, they're quite easy. So, it very much depends on the equipment people have got and indeed their home environment, that they've got somewhere suitable to conduct the meeting, because we can't assume that everybody has. On length of meetings, I'm not sure we can really judge anything on the statistics, because it depends what we've been discussing. Obviously, we've had a lot to discuss the last few months. And I actually think in some ways, if you have an agenda with not much on it, when we go to the town hall, there's almost this unwritten pressure that because you've had 20 people assemble, we've all travelled a long way in, it's like we can't just do it in half an hour. Well, that's not right, because it's unseemingly, we have to somehow justify dragging the meeting on. So I think that goes a little bit online. So I think, actually, I don't find them any longer. I think we get through things just as quickly. The only other comment, I noticed that remote meetings seem more popular with officers than councillors at the moment, just looking at the statistics. The actual number of councillors who support a full move to remote meetings are still in the minority. So that's something we have to bear in mind. But no, other than that, I would support what's written in paragraph 2.3. Thank you. Thank
you, Councillor Dundas. Yeah, I take your point about equipment. I think that is essential. And if we are going to continue meeting virtually for some time to come yet, it may be something that we need to review as a whole council, because I'm not convinced that everybody has the right equipment to do what they need to do in the most healthy way. Councillor Willits.
Chairman, I'm happy to lobby for remote working forever. I think we should be really heavy in our response to government about the advantages of meeting remotely. Sometimes local authorities are a bit stick in the mud. Well, not local authorities, Chairman. I mean, the whole of the world is a bit stick in the mud. We like things that we're accustomed to and have done it this way for the last 20 years. So why should it be any different? And just as we see the fundamental changes brought about by internet in the high street, I think we're now going to see the same fundamental changes in the way local government does its job, particularly in areas like ours, where we've got a large rural hinterland covered by councillors who have to journey quite some distance, not as bad as Essex County Council, where it's half a day's horse ride from County Hall. But nevertheless, I mean, there is a lot of time wasted coming in from the Tiptrees and the MERSs, and remote working certainly does improve the efficiency and the effectiveness. I think that we have to remember we're here to take decisions about the issues facing the borough. We're not here to provide competition to MTV in terms of a YouTube channel or a broadcast environment. And we can get carried away and think that we're there to liaise with the have your say speakers and provide them with a platform to keep us all amused, which is not the case. I mean, we must focus on the fact that we're here to analyse and decide what is best for the borough. And in terms of viewing, it's interesting to see the difference between viewing figures this year and audio figures last year. But one truism seems to remain constant, Chairman. That is that when people are not watching or listening to us, we're probably doing it right. And when we have thousands of people queuing up to talk about pedestrianisation, we're probably doing it wrong. And it doesn't matter whether it's remote working or people pouring into the high street. There are certain truisms which apply all of the time. But if I can address one or two specific issues where I still have worries despite reading this most excellent report. The first of those, Chairman, is how well remote working operates when we have professionals not coming in for have your say, as they do say at the beginning of a planning item, but when they are sort of embedded in the course of an item. Now, I don't think we've actually had any disciplinary hearings during the course of last year. Councillors have been amazingly well behaved and sober in their public pronouncements. So we've never been in the situation where we say run a rather difficult disciplinary hearing remotely, although I gather that in the licensing committee they have had reams of barristers arriving and wishing to participate and defend the position of their licensees. But it would be good to hear just a little more about how well we think things will work when we do have professionals involved in a discussion as opposed to just topping and tailing an item. The next issue I would raise is from the protocol, whether members should be switched on for the whole of the 4 hours, and I think 4 hours is much too long, but I'll come back to that in a moment, 4 hours during the effluxion of a council meeting or a long committee meeting. My heart always sinks, Chairman, when I hear someone say, I hadn't intended to speak on this item, but then goes on to rehearse the matters which have just been made by the 3 previous speakers. And at the last council meeting, I was almost encouraged to see when that happened, all of a sudden, councillors were just turning off their video and going to make a cup of tea, because this is a good signal back to the speakers who've not got it quite right, that perhaps they should think about the content of their speeches. This needs to be contrasted with the idea that councillors are there for the whole of the meeting, attending. But I think it is good to be able to switch off and say, this is a load of rubbish, I don't want to listen to it. And just as a matter of protest, turn my video off from time to time to show that I don't wish to engage with the rot that is being spoken by certain members, sometimes by me even, Chairman. But I think the protocol needs to clarify just whether we should be there all the time or whether there are circumstances where we can disengage to show our disapproval. If I can come to the length of meetings, one of the reasons meetings go on is that we've tried cost cutting on meetings, reducing the number of meetings, which has necessarily mean meetings extend in length, and we see planning meetings going on until 11 o'clock at night. I'm not sure that those same harsh criticisms on cost of meetings apply on visual meetings. It's quite easy to cut a meeting off after 2 hours because we're getting tired and wish to go away and refresh. Whereas at the town hall to do so, and members sort of go home and have to come back and resume a meeting the following week with all the costs of officers' time travelling in, with the costs of opening the town hall. So I think perhaps we need to consider whether shorter meetings and more of them may be possible and a better way forward with remote meetings. And the final point is, I think, given what has happened to date, remote meetings are the way forward, and we should be moving towards a more formalised webcast if ever we start up our real live meetings again from the town hall. There may be no budget for us, but that should not stop us saying this is a good thing. We wish to consider webcasting for live meetings, and perhaps as a move forward from Zoom. And the fact that there's no budget for it doesn't mean to say we should not make those recommendations, which I would fully support. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Willits. Yeah, I was looking across at all of our colleagues as you were speaking. I didn't see anybody go to make a cup of tea, so you're all right. But I think in terms of meeting length, I think that's very important, especially we've discussed health and safety this evening. There is a health and safety issue around staring at a screen for lengthy periods of time. So I know we would normally at full council probably just have the one break. Maybe if we're talking about meetings of 4 hours length, we need to ensure that there is some sort of break at 90 minutes or so, so that people can just have that break from staring at a screen for a lengthy period of time. And I take your point about wanting to continue doing what we've been doing, because it has improved the, we're not chasing ratings, but it has improved the interaction between residents of Colchester and what we actually do here. And that's absolutely critical. I think it's important that residents of Colchester know what's happening, know what we're doing as councillors, and know what we're doing and what our officers are doing to implement policies. I'll take Councillor McCarthy now, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. And before I go on to talk about pleasantries and how grateful I am, not just to the officers, but for all of us, I think we all deserve a bit of a pat on the back for being able to tolerate being on Zoom for the last 6 months or so. And I think it's actually a credit to our democracy that we've been able to do this. But I've got two disagreements with the panel. Councillor Willits, he says he thinks remote meetings should stay forever. I couldn't agree less. I think hybrid meetings perhaps should stay forever, but I don't think we should ever. I think it's actually damaging to democracy that we stay on a virtual platform to be able to communicate with each other during these, especially things like planning, full council. In my personal opinion, I think they're better done in person when the time is right. There was jotted down a few notes here. Length of committee meetings as well. Again, I think there was full council and I believe scrutiny were the two that were the longest. I think if you sit on the scrutiny panel, as Councillor Dundas does and as do I, you kind of know that you're going to be in for the long haul when you're on one of those meetings. I don't think you should be sitting on the scrutiny panel if you can't tolerate being on a meeting for maybe 3-4 hours. Obviously, we do get breaks. It's chaired very, very well, but I don't think that's particularly an issue. So I'm not sure which councillor has said that they think length of meetings are a problem on the survey that went out, but most of the other panels only last about 2 hours. I think it's the most disagreeing I've ever done when speaking on Zoom. And then lastly, the last point I want to make is we've got 6 recommendations here that I agree with. I think there ought to be a 7th. Unless I'm being blind, and I have spent most of the day on the computer, I don't believe that this is coming back to us before the end of the municipal year. Would it not be wise for it to come back to the panel perhaps in March to see where we are after Christmas, after whatever happens with Essex County Council and what tier we end up in after Christmas? So could that be potentially added in as a 7th recommendation, please? Apart from that, that's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. And of course, we have the work programme to agree before the end of the meeting, so we can include that in the work programme. And I think that's a very valid point. Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to echo a lot of the comments that were made before, especially about the work of the Democratic Services team and everyone in putting all these meetings together at very short pace, very fast pace earlier in the year. I do remember back in March, which was the last live meeting we had. It was at the end of that, we were sort of leaving, I glanced at my phone and the headline there was that Italy had gone into full national lockdown. And we were like, oh, that's interesting. Wonder if we'd ever have anything like that. It's going to get that bad here. And I wasn't really expecting that 6 months later I'd still be sitting on the council in a meeting like this. But I think there's a couple of points I wanted to make. I think first is that in terms of the way we conduct meetings, there's going to be a general shift in society as a result of this, as what people expect in terms of work meetings, anything like that. What can be done live, what needs to be done live, and what we can do virtually, and what we can do via Zoom, etc. And I think people's expectations are going to be changed after this. And over time, as the membership of the council changes, you get a new generation coming in, and people are just used to doing meetings online a lot more than doing a lot more than they have been up to now. We've got a very big break there, and I think we'll need as a council to adapt to that. And I think some things have come up, like the idea that briefings, especially doing those online, I think is a lot easier, and it also means you can get a lot more people involved in the room. Some of those, and one thing that sort of comes out of that I think we all need to consider that's useful in briefings. I think we need to consider how we can integrate it into live meetings is using the chat function for questions. One thing I think we've all noticed in the briefings and whatever we've been in is that quite often people have quite simple questions that they want answered. They can just type it in and get an answer straight away without having to sort of interrupt the main briefing and going on that. So I think that's the sort of thing we need to consider, is how we can integrate those extra functions if we're meeting online into live meetings and hybrid meetings. And I think generally that use of technology, if we're going to be having hybrid meetings, we're going to be needing more councillors to actually be online, able to look at screens and look at the interactions that are going on. So I think there's going to be, it's not just going to be us as well, it's going to be across the country and various councils, how people are actually going to, what people are going to expect from us after this, how accessible we're going to be. And I think, as other councillors have said, this idea of how we're going to be expected, I think, to be doing live webcasting. Even if we go back to fully live meetings, people are going to expect to be able to just see it online again. I don't think we can then say to everyone, oh no, you've got to come back in person along as us. People just have seen that we can do this. And so I think we need to look at the ways we can keep doing that. One thing I would suggest that we look into, and I don't think it needs to be a full recommendation, is this question of how we conduct voting. I think the one thing I noticed when we did full council as a virtual meeting was when you've got 51 people who have to vote and it has to be conducted, Mr. Weaver's calls name, that person goes on, it takes a long time, and you have to do that repeatedly for a series of votes. Is what systems there may be in place for electronic voting, people just having to press a button, if CMIS are going to introduce anything like that we can do. I know this is actually quite a trickier problem than you think, because I spoke to some of the people involved in putting our party conference online, and putting the conference online and the speeches, and they'd speak to all these companies to do that, and they go, oh yes, that's fine, we can do that. And then they go, right, now we need to talk about voting. And they go, oh, voting? Oh, we don't have systems for that. There's lots of systems for people talking about things online, for actually doing some of the other things we need aren't there. But I think these sort of things will develop over time, and people are going to expect us to have them as we develop. And sort of, we've done, I think, work over the last few years on this committee in sort of dragging meeting procedures and how we do meetings into the 21st century. And the 21st century is moving a lot quicker than we thought. So now I think we have to be thinking about in the future how we're going to adapt to people's expectations of democracy and just how the world is going to work. Even when we've got a vaccine, when the pandemic's gone, people are going to be expecting things to be working differently. And I think we'll need to be ready to adapt to that and not just think we can jump back to how everything was before.
Thank you, Councillor Barlow. Yeah, I think you make a very important point there about voting systems as well. I was recently in attendance at my union annual conference, and there was an electronic voting system that was made available to all of us, so that it's a relatively easy thing to do. It's out there. We just have to find the right one that works for us and incorporate it. So I think, unless, is there anything, Mr. Weavers, you want to come back on?
Thank you, Chair. I think, just to be clear, I don't think that post-COVID we'd be looking at going back to old, shall we say, traditional style meetings. I think the way forward is the hybrid meetings. When I say remote, I mean I would class hybrid as being part of that as well. That way you do enable those members who can get to a meeting to be there in a room, and those that can't make it, or for whatever reason, can still participate. And also officers who are presenting can also present remotely, and also people who have their say, they can still contribute remotely as well. I think that's all I would really want to say from the points raised. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, just on hybrid meetings, I think that's one of the, it's probably the one item in the agenda that sticks out most for me, because having been involved in my working life now in hybrid meetings over probably at least a couple of years, maybe a little bit longer than that, I've always found that with hybrid meetings, those who are there in person tend to make the most of the meeting, whereas those who are there virtually tend to be on the periphery of the meeting. So I think we just need to find, if we're going to move to some form of hybrid meeting in the future, we just need to find a way to ensure that everybody has an equal involvement and an equal say in that meeting. Did you want to just come back on that, Andrew?
Sorry, can I just mention, you see in the report, there is a reference to the NEP committee, and that is a classic example of how remote meetings have worked really well, where you would normally have councillors from right across the county coming to Colchester, or we going, for example, to Harlow, and that has enabled them to, participate much more easily. And that is a classic example for a hybrid meeting, I think, going forward.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Where previously we were having people travel all over the county for a 2-hour meeting, even an hour-long meeting, it makes much more sense to do that virtually, doesn't it? So yeah, I think going forward there is a lot to be said for virtual meetings, but also the points that have been made this evening about face-to-face meetings and ensuring that as soon as it's safe to do so, we return to at least some of those, I think is an important point as well. So I just, before I ask members to go back to the recommendations, I just want to also thank you, Andrew, and everybody else who's contributed to the report that's before us this evening, because I think it's quite a comprehensive report. There was a lot for us to consider. The viewing figures for governance and audit may not be the highest across the council, but as Councillor Willits has already pointed out, it often depends on what the controversies are. And I'm sure I don't want to, I'm tapping on the wooden table as I say this. I think it's far better that we don't have any discipline or conduct matters coming before us, but no doubt if we were to have, our viewing figures would go up markedly. Members, we've got the recommendations. I'm not going to go through them one by one, because I think listening to everybody speak, it seems that everybody seems to be in agreement with all of them as a whole. So on this one, just because we're going to be making a recommendation to full council, I'm going to suggest that we take a named vote. So Matt, can I pass over to you, please?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Chair. Councillors, usual procedure, I'll call your names in alphabetical order. Would you just please indicate whether you are in support of the recommended decisions or not? So starting with Councillor Barlow.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Dundas.
For.
Councillor Gocher.
For.
Councillor McCarthy.
4.
Councillor Pearson,
4.
Councillor Willits,
4.
and Councillor Wood.
4.
Thank you. Thanks, Chairman. That's unanimous.
Thank you, everyone. Right, very interesting discussion and report. So thank you all. We move on to the final item on the agenda, and that's the work programme for 2021. And I think Councillor McCarthy made an important point that maybe at our last meeting of the municipal year, we probably just want to revisit the protocol, equipment issues, and maybe just I don't think we need the detailed report that we've had this evening, but just an overview of where we're actually at in 6 months' time. Apart from that, is there anything else on the work programme that anybody wants to raise? No, I'm not seeing any show of hands. So I'll take it that the work programme is approved with that addition and leave it to you, Matt. And
Chairman's Councillor Gocher indicating.
Right. I don't see a hand up.
No, I was just voting yes. Sorry.
Excuse me.
No, I've still got the participants, but I didn't see a hand up. So, right. And so unless anybody else wants to say anything, that's the end of the meeting. We've managed to do that in 1 hour and 10 minutes. Well done, everybody. Thank you for your contributions.
You brought the average meeting time down this evening, so well done. We're looking more competitive with physical meetings.
Well done, everyone. Thank you and good night. Stay safe.
Thanks all. Take care.
Thank you, Chair.